Usually a crisis has been caused by a lack of communication. So what's the solution? Communicate. When Richard Brooks was called into Oldfields in 1996, the business was effectively bust. It owed more than it ever had to its creditors. The three main creditors were the bank through an invoice discounting arrangement, the Inland Revenue, and the bread supplier. Well, it would be, it was making sandwiches. So Richard came in alongside the founder. Neither of them had worked in the business before. They left that to another management team who were not capable of doing it, so they were asked to leave. Then what did they do? Well, Michael, the entrepreneur, had some ideas to grow the business, but he had no cash. So he got Richard to speak to the creditors and he said, look, here's the state of the business. You're owed a lot of money and there's no way we can pay you at the moment, but we want to take this business forward. And they said, well, sounds like you guys know what you're talking about, so let's see how it goes. And Richard gave them a short-term cash flow forecast. You're going to get this amount in this week, you're going to get that amount in that week. 6 weeks later, he came back to each of them and said, we fulfilled our promises, how are you? And they said, yep, we can see that, we'll stick with this. So they stuck with it, and Michael met a company called the Seattle Coffee Company, which shortly afterwards was taken over by Starbucks. Starbucks grew the business, the sandwich maker grew on the back of it, and a good few years later it was sold. I think it was £40 million was the amount that was received. So that's what the one advantage of talking to people. And I've talked there about the large creditors. What about the smaller guys, the other people? They all need paying, don't they? And just because they're only owed £100 or £1,000 doesn't mean they're not entitled to it. They're not going to ring you up and ask you for it. Well, when another of my colleagues went into a building contractor, similar sort of time period actually, he could see that the accounts department spent all their time answering queries for small creditors, whether they could get their £150, their £299, copying invoices, toing and froing with them. Nobody had any time to spend on turning the business around, addressing what needed to be done. Even though the business was struggling for cash, he said, we need to pay these people, we can't get anything done until we do, so it'll cost us £10,000, but let's get this done. So he got it done. The phone stopped ringing. He could concentrate on the big issues. The big issue was it needed to sell a piece of land to pay off the bank, and Simon managed to do that. The business was restored. He'd had the time to focus on it. He'd had the time to make sure that the business could become solvent. So, crisis over.